Oh, could I just say to everyone before we start that if you start to feel a bit stiff and you need to move while we're talking, can you please feel free to do that, to move around, to stretch and stand up, and so that you don't feel embarrassed if you want to move, because it's difficult sitting in a chair for a long time. So, yeah, look after yourselves through this time. Good.
So I was just wondering, KB, I mean, I'd like to just start by, your own journey on mindfulness. I mean, I'm curious to hear about how it all started.
Well, if I go right back, when I was a new primary school teacher in London, working in tough schools, I started to develop a way of teaching young children, sort of 8, 9, 10-year-olds, using direct experience. And I became quite well known for this curriculum based upon direct experience. That's people, objects, places. And developed a curriculum which was whole. So maths, languages, science, art, everything was based upon some kind of direct experience. And I called it direct experience-based learning, typical direct experience-based learning. And when I became a deputy head and then a head later on in my career, I used to take this idea around different schools and training centres. So my early life, I was very much involved with direct experience-based learning. I had no idea about Buddhism or mindfulness. Not really. It wasn't what I hadn't made that link. So I started with children, inspired by feeling, I was so bored when I was young at school. I was so thoroughly bored that I didn't engage at all. So I developed this kind of curriculum because I wanted to help the kids be less bored. And it was fantastically exciting. And then, of course, if you're old enough, you might remember this. I was headmaster of a small school in the countryside with ducks and chickens and a pond and all sorts of animals that I brought in. And they brought in the national curriculum in England, which was like a like a prison for children. It's like, you will do this on this day. And I ended up resigning and moving into Buddhist studies and spending quite a few years retreating and this, that and the other. So my actual beginning with mindfulness was this early curriculum, because one way of describing mindfulness is direct experience-based learning. I mean, I haven't heard anyone else call it that, but I'm quite pleased with that, because it meant I was tuning into something way before it got to be sexy or popular or whatever. It just made sense that learning should be based in direct experience, not in teachers going on talking and books, dry books. And I mean, I love books, but I think books work well when they're connecting to direct experience, to life, to people, places. So then I made the move into Buddhism, and many years after being kind of immersed in Buddhism, I discovered a practice called the Anapanasati practice. It was part of my journey as a Buddhist, was to discover this Anapanasati. That's Sanskrit for breathing in and breathing out practice. And if you don't know it, I recommend a book called Breath by Breath, which I now have 3 copies of because the first 2 have fallen apart. It's the kind of book you just read again and again and explore, month by month. So I came across Anapanasati, and it was such a simple approach to working out what life is really all about. So I started to delve into this. Really, it's mindfulness practice. It's Anapanasati is a bit like the sketchbook that if you know what the Satipatthana is, the huge, the oldest, most full description of mindfulness is in this 2,500-year-old book or teaching called The Foundations of Mindfulness, the Satipatthanas. And the Anapanasati practice is like the sketchbook for that. So the Satipatthana is the great big finished painting, and the Anapanasati is like the way you work it out, the workings out, day by day, breath by breath. So this is a long answer, but anyway, I fell in love with the Anapanasati practice, and about 2 or 3 years after falling in love with this practice, I found out that there was a medical approach to depression based in mindfulness. So I was training at that point to be a psychotherapist, and I thought, wow, this is two worlds coming together. So like all this, in fact, more than two worlds. I realize now that the teaching world, the world of Buddhism, and the world of psychology coalescing and coming together. It was so exciting. So I went straight to Bangor and started to do it up there and do a master's up there. And then a few years after I finished the master's, the people there invited me to come and teach there. So I've been teaching there for the last 12 years or so, where I've met some of you. So yeah, really, that's the kind of story. I mean, there's another story about how come I got to be a Buddhist. There's another story about how I came to be a teacher, which is a bit bizarre because I never thought I would. And then another story about why I wanted to be a psychotherapist. But they're two that you don't really. My mindfulness story really is about all of those coming together. I think maybe I'll take a breather there. If later you have questions about any of that, you maybe could ask around that.
But it's really fascinating, Karunavira. It's kind of the direct experience that you describe, and I was kind of curious, how did that kind of came? Because even before Buddhism, before kind of the psychological training, there's something there which is really interesting and curious that kind of seems like flowered itself into this kind of multifaceted story. So what was it, when you say direct experience, is it something that you own experience yourself that kind of led you to think, oh, this is really important?
Most things are a combination of conditions, aren't they? In fact, all things are a combination of conditions. So when I went, after my first degree, I went to a training college for teaching. I happened to be part of a very prestigious primary school training school called Goldsmiths in London. And at that time, it was led by a most brilliant person. And the tutors on that course were completely passionate about letting children really experience the world and really not treating them like kids, but really teaching them sort of skills like calligraphy and book binding and printing, and so that the whole rich approach to education. So in a way, my approach to the direct experience-based learning was very much linked to these very lovely tutors I met at Goldsmiths. I just sort of developed it from there. I think underneath all that was the fact that I spent my childhood out, just out on the South Downs, out all day, every day, experiencing. And then, except for the school times when we're inside in these wooden desks with lids that went up and down and kind of like boring. I mean, they thought at school I was naughty because I didn't do anything. Yeah, I wasn't naughty. I was just completely confused about what was going on. What is going on? I can't do this. I didn't engage. So I come back to this Confucius quote. I'll go on about this. Some of you know this. So from the Confucian school, 3rd century BC, tell me I forget, teach me I remember, involve me I learn. So, if you want to carry the message away with you, that 3 lines, tell me I forget, teach me I remember, but involve me I learn. So what I found with mindfulness teaching was it was all about involving people in their learning, in their journey. It wasn't about filling them up with some ideas. It's about helping them find their own answers, their own way, and that excites me. It's like plugging people into a battery, sort of plugging the heart into a battery, and kind of waking up. Oh, I'm alive. I can do this. I can do anything. So anyway, it
No,
came from
fascinating. So it's interesting, isn't it? It's kind of this multifaceted world of stories, but there's a kind of common thread there which evolves. And I'm just wondering, how was it in terms of because it sounds that they kind of fitted into each other very well. Or was it, or the phrase sometimes we use, taking the ducks to the water. So was it kind of easy going? So there's one and there's another training, or were there any challenges you as a practitioner fitting these different approaches?
I mean, the first challenge was that in the schools I worked with, many teachers didn't understand this approach. They found it scary. How do you teach without a book? How do you teach without a complete plan? So a big challenge in terms of trying to get this communicating, how it could be joyful to teach. I mean, I still have dreams where I wake up crying because I'm not teaching kids. So I'm saying that because I loved the job so much. I really loved my work. And I met lots of teachers who were like tearing their hair out. I can't do this. It's awful, stressed and upset. And I think it's possible to teach in a joyful way. A kind of, it's hard too. You get little buggers, they go misbehaving, difficult kids. But overall, I enjoyed it. I'm not sure if it's answering, but the challenge of trying to communicate a different way of a change is very difficult. And then of course, when it came to Buddhism and mindfulness, there's a lot of people in the Buddhist world that say, oh yeah, they're stealing our people are stealing our thing, and they shouldn't steal it and use it for medicine. And there's a whole load of stuff around the politics of religion, which I think is really stupid. But yeah, that was a challenge, feeling outside of the group, the Buddhist group, because I'd taken this journey into therapy and mindfulness. But that all cleared. It cleared in the end. But the initially, change is threatening for people. No, actually, it's always threatening for people, but you can resolve it maybe. So there were challenges, and there still are. I'm still trying to protect this idea of embodied learning. And there are forces, in the time of Zoom, there are forces against embodied learning. And it's just another whole thing to try and work out how do you do embodied learning online. I'm finding it really is possible. It really is possible. But so there's still challenges. There always will be challenge. I mean, without challenge, we don't really work out what we know. As complacency would be the fruit of no challenge. Too much challenge, you get flattened, give up. too little, you just sort of float about, not really defining your values clearly enough. So it's like stress, isn't it? Stress really keeps us going, but too much of it flattens us. Yeah. Anyway, something about challenge. Yeah, there are challenges. It's hard work teaching mindfulness. Yeah, it's really hard work. You're asking people to do something completely bonkers, like sit down or lie down for 45 minutes doing nothing when they've never done that in their lives, and to do it every day on their own. And why? And the teacher says, "Oh, you'll find out soon." Oh, interesting question. But it's really hard, because what they meet all those kind of ghosts of their personality, the kind of beasts, the wicked beasts that lurk in the caverns come out, and the selfish person, the angry person, the shy, desperately shy person. They all kind of come out of the caves. And so you're teaching them something which is drawing out quite an unpleasant experience at times. I don't want that. So I think the challenge of teaching is huge. Kind of holding their hand through this process until they discover that actually this is really important work to become. It's about inclusion. That's the word I like to use these days. Equality, diversity, inclusion, EDI, this sort of, can we have that policy for ourselves? Can there be, equality of experience? Can we treat experience equally? Can we have this inclusion of all the aspects from the dark caves of ourselves? And can we really offer that sense of EDI within our inner world? And then, of course, it would be so simple outwardly. Not simple, but it would be easier if we'd done the work inside. But what we're trying to do often these days is put these values on the top of people. And so you must learn this from the top, from the head down. And of course there's resistance, because it's not coming from, it's not in harmony with the inner work. It doesn't sit with the inner work. So equality, inclusion and diversity, it's got to start at home. I think, of course, you need the political parts of it too. That's incredibly important. But I think the focus on what we're doing as mindfulness teachers is preparing the ground for those seeds. I think that's a really important thing these days. There's so much just so much division and suspicion and fear and unnecessary separation. And I do notice that COVID has helped mend some of that. I'm saying hello to people that I'd never say hello to all the time on my walks, and there's a sense that we're sharing something really important together. So I think I feel a lot of hope actually for humanity right now. There's a sense that there's still a lot of division, but there's little signs of people coming together more. And within my family too. I've never talked to my mum as much as I have this year. Never. I FaceTime her every night. We got nothing to say to each other, but we sit and chat for half an hour. It's sort of. So some very nice things are happening. Sorry, I'm kind of wandering now, but please ask me something different. Yeah.
I get a sense it's interesting, it's vital, it's important, but also very skilled, skillful. And it's something that kind of I have really picked up or sensed or felt it, with working with you, is the skillfulness. And I think having that background as a teacher, and it certainly comes through that. Yeah. Yes.
I like to think of it as a craft. My father was he passed a few years back now, but he was a gilder and a a wood carver, a restoration artist, and he spent his whole life very poor. You don't get paid much for that craft, but he was so brilliant at his craft. And I think that what I picked up from my father was this idea of being a craftsman. So craftsman's a bit different. It's a lot of work. Like my son's a violinist. Hey, that's a bit similar too, isn't it? So he's a violinist, 10,000 hours of practice, or that's what you need, isn't it, to get good? 10,000 hours. But yeah, so you need to put in the time, but you can't do that without love. You just can't do it. You can't force 10,000 hours on the violin unless you like it, love it. And so there's a skill which is based in the kind of commitment and love. And the love is really connected, it's self-love as much as other love. It's like sitting quietly with my breath, if I'm not forcing, is very, very lovely. Okay, it's often difficult. And I'm going to get on my bandwagon now and say something about the breath. Is that all right? I just want to say something about the breath.
Go ahead.
Using your breath as an anchor is always going to be challenging. And there's a current idea, a very important idea about trauma sensitivity, which means we're introducing other anchors, like the feet, the hands, sounds. But I'm noticing that people are using those other anchors not because they have trauma, but because the breath is a challenging object. And it's challenging because it shows us just how much we're not focused on anything. It's challenging because we see our mind very clearly because the breath is continuous, it's dynamic, and when we move away from it, it's very obvious. It's very kind of like really there. So I'm thinking that learning to use the breath as an anchor, not a focus, but as a friend that can help us settle into a kind of calm, stable state where we can see what's going on in our mind and in the world. I think it's a very valuable anchor. And I'm a little bit worried even that the idea that it's problematic could actually undermine something which has been proven over the last at least 3,000-4,000 years to be a very, very helpful aid to calming the mind and body. So I just wanted to give that little plug, that little personal plug, that some of us need to use different anchors because there's trauma, and some people with trauma are really triggered by a breath practice. But it is actually, if you do the maths, a very small percentage of a small percentage that have that particular condition. So for the rest of us, it's okay, it's good to play with different anchors, but the breath is actually a very important option. And I can recommend some writing by John Kabat-Zinn on this in the foreword of a book by Analayo called The Mindfulness of Breathing. It's about the Anapanasati practice. And John writes a very lengthy foreword about the breath. So if you're interested in mindfulness teaching or mindfulness, that foreword is really worth reading. Anyway, that's a little, you talk about challenge, that's one of our challenges in the mindfulness world is, how do we respond to trauma in a way that, the baby and bathwater, wooden tree, that metaphor, how do we respond to trauma without ditching something very important? Without kind of losing a certain kind of clarity about the anchor. And the other big issue is that there's still a huge amount of confusion about the difference between concentration practices using the breath and mindfulness practices using the breath. They're both fabulous, but they have different intentions in the short run. And so I think clarifying that would be important for all of us.
Well, that brings me very well to the next kind of thread that I was going to follow, because there's so much there, KB, and it's the value of the craftsmanship, the value of breath, and your background. So, and I was just sitting wondering, yes, we know, John Kabat-Zinn's kind of famous description of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and then Mark Williams has it. So how would KV describe mindfulness, especially like talking about the concentration, mindfulness, the breath? So how would you describe what is KV's description of mindfulness, if you want to kind of put it that
Shall we start by correcting John Kabat-Zinn?
Okay.
They're not correcting him, but correcting the way he's remembered. John Kabat-Zinn says, mindfulness is the awareness that arises. I think if we stop there, just stop there. Mindfulness is the awareness that arises when. So the first thing to say, it's awareness that arises when. And that gets kind of lost because of all the other words after it. So what we're talking about is something about creating conditions where awareness arises. John goes on to say, when we pay attention in a particular way. I'd like to say when we give attention in a particular way. So when we give our attention to something in a particular way, awareness can arise. Now I think I would like to sort of borrow the word from Thich Nhat Hanh, which is appreciation, and say that mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we offer appreciative attention to our life. So I'll cut out all the other stuff. I think appreciative attention means present moment. I'm not saying this is another big topic, but what is a present moment? If we're awake, it is the present moment. We could be thinking about our childhood, still present moment. We're not anywhere else. We're here thinking about our childhood. So present moment can be thinking about your childhood. It can be thinking about your holiday when we get out of lockdown. If we know that that's what we're doing, it's present moment. So I would say that mindfulness is the awareness that arises when we offer appreciative attention, a sort of tender, appreciative attention to our lives, in our lives. Something like that. A quality of appreciating what's in front of us and what's within us and what other people and the world. I mean, just take David Attenborough for example. Just wow. They're like Saint Mindfulness, isn't he? So Saint Mindfulness, David Attenborough, sort of. The whole fascination, the whole appreciative awareness thing, a whole lifetime of it. Yeah, I think he should be canonized Saint Mindfulness or something like that. Was Saint David, yeah. But so something like that. Something like, yeah. And learning from this. So I think that's the bit that's left out. I'll just add that on the end. And learning from giving this attention and learning from it. Because I'm going to say something controversial. Mindfulness is not a creative thing. I mean, I'm just being controversial, of course. It's great. Yeah, it's something we learn from doing this. We learn. It's sort of, we're not making it. It's already there. Reality is here. It's here. We're not making something happen. We're just learning about it so that we can live in harmony with it. So we're learning about it to live in harmony with it. So the creativity bit is how we then live in harmony with the understanding we get from paying attention. So often the idea of learning from it gets dropped. So if I was going to give you John's definition, it would end with that extra phrase, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgment, without too much judgment, bringing judgment into awareness and learning from this, something like that. But hey, definitions, they're all words. I'd love to hear all of you guys. There could be a competition within your group. Come up with the shortest and clearest definition of mindfulness that you can find. And the prize would be a raisin. Go on. I'm sure there's another question somewhere there. Yeah. Or maybe we've reached that break time.
So shall we have a break on that note, on the mindful raisin note, and maybe, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions that people would like to ask. So shall we have a 7-minute break? So a short break. I was thinking of 10 minutes. What are your thoughts?
Before I stop, Avinash, can I just seed the question thing? Plant a little seed.
Yeah.
The new MBSR curriculum that's coming out as we speak may indicate that we have to do the metta, the loving kindness practice in week 7. So, and I'm going to say something really controversial here. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Yeah. So it's always good to stir the pot, isn't it? Okay, we'll have a break. Yeah, go on.
Maybe you can describe more around MBSR, MBCT, and maybe how bringing in MBSR rather than MBCT, or both maybe is controversial or maybe not. So a short break. So it's 8:03. So shall we say 8:10? We'll come back. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Wonderful. So I just put something in the chat box inviting you to, ask, offer any questions for KV. And it's interesting because when I was thinking about the conversation, I had 15 questions, and in the first 30 minutes, we only did 3 questions. So, so I think we need to have you back again, KV, for the kind of version 2 or part 2. But I'm really interested because I think this is the platform for the community and friends. So, if it's okay, or what are your thoughts? Like maybe inviting people to, if there are any questions, and maybe anything else you want to bring in. I'd love to hear that as well.
There's one question in the chat already, which is very interesting, about mindfulness and helping people through this period of with a lot of loss, grieving, and and also I think even bigger than that, the kind of damage around isolation and. Even this agoraphobic kind of behaviours really taking off. So, but staying with the question, which is about the NHS using mindfulness for grieving and healing. I as a therapist, I think that the grieving aspect is really served by family and counsellors speaking. There's a need for conversation That could be a mindful conversation, but heartful. There's no difference between mind and heart, and no difference between compassion and mindfulness, really. But, whatever we call it, I think there's a need for a conversation, many conversations, about our loss. And not to be, I think, not mindfulness, not in the kind of formal way of sitting with it on our own, but I think there's a need. We have a need to talk about our loss, and with the need for the government to talk about our loss, and within the NHS, the workers to talk about their loss, and also the gains. Within the NHS, I know there's a new spirit of. It was getting eroded in the NHS. I don't work very much for the NHS, but there was a bit of grumbling and mumbling and moaning about managers and this and that. And I think that this crisis has really helped a sense of the collective, the kind of the passion of working with the health service. So there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of exhaustion and upset because of government failing. Not in Scotland. You did the right thing up in Scotland. You gave workers the right amount of, at least something better than 1%. But down in England, so I'm going to stay with that as a quick answer. I think there's a need for a conversation, or many conversations, and listening. So the grieving process, I think we'll come to mindfulness later, but in the first instance, I think that sort of formal mindfulness practice isn't really what we need. We need a mindful communication, maybe mindful listening. Yeah. Anyway, that's just my view. There's no talk about that process as far as I know it. I work within CAMS, which is with young people. And we're just trying to keep going. Just keep the show on the road. There's no sense of letting up and reflecting on what's gone wrong. It's just trying to keep up with the backlog. I mean, it's like we've got a huge backlog. Some young people have got to wait 18 months before they get seen. I mean, if you're a parent of a kid who's suffering and they've got to wait 18 months to get some sort of help, you might as well be living in Africa somewhere. It really is not good. So there's an awful lot of, we're still coping with the crisis. And I think that process of coping with the crisis, the aftermath, once the infection rates are right down, there's going to be all the catching up to do. And then the reckoning and the conversations. And at some point in the future, hopefully, I teach mindfulness to staff, or used to. I don't do so much now. I need to develop a more aware working environment. Let's call it that. Yeah.
So the answers are coming very.
There are more chats.
There are more chats. So they're kind of. So Irene is asking really interesting thoughts on the breath, anchor in trauma. As a former teacher, what are your thoughts about place for mindfulness in schools?
Okay, as a former teacher, what are your thoughts about the place of mindfulness in schools? Yeah, I didn't call it mindfulness in schools. I just called it a curriculum. I think boxing it into a little bit of the curriculum is not what I want to see. Like, we're doing mindfulness on Friday afternoon for an hour. No. I think the best mindfulness in schools is where the school has a culture, the teachers create a culture of awareness, which is going right the way through the curriculum, all aspects. So I think you get schools where that happens, and you get other schools which just have a tokenistic approach, and they do mindfulness. It's not bad, but I don't think mindfulness was never intended to be a little subject amongst the big subjects, or a little thing you do on the edge. It's always been, what's the quote from the Satipatthana? This is the direct path for the easing of suffering. That's a definition from the good book, Satipatthana. This is the direct path, the direct path for the easing of suffering. So I think that schools that take it on in that sense, let's have a culture of awareness, let's use mindfulness to help that grow. Fantastic. May it thrive. And I guess the logistics are you start where you start where you can. There's quite a big movement in England, at least, to bring mindfulness into schools. But it's not yet been embraced as, like science or French or whatever. It's still on the edges. There's not really a buy-in to this holistic education that we'd like to see. I hope that answers it a bit. This is a good one. The difference between an anchor and a focus. Let me get something to show you. If I can find it.
The mouse, the computer mouse.
Oh yes, there's the boat. Here's the boat, and here's the anchor for the boat. You can't see the anchor, it's on the bottom of the seabed, but the anchor is holding the boat. So you all know what an anchor does. This is the function of the anchor. But you also might know that if you've ever used an anchor on a boat, that the anchor allows the boat to move. If it didn't, the boat would capsize and be blown apart by waves and destroyed. So the metaphor of the anchor is something which allows movement. But if it's not there, the boat crashes onto the rocks of sleep, distracted mind, fantasies. So the anchor holds a boat safely by allowing some movement. A focused approach isn't quite like that. A focused approach is a different metaphor. The focus it's an optical metaphor. Is it focus? It means bringing your attention down to a small point and encouraging a stability of mind and body through that small point. So a focus is steady and still. The anchor allows movement. Now, they're both valuable, but they have different intentions. The anchor allows the person to start seeing the movements of the mind quite early on in the practice. In the first few years, you start to learn how to, oh yeah, that's what my mind's doing. The focused approach aims to create a very steady mind, a very still, purified mind that starts to see what's going on. But that approach really needs quite special conditions, I would say, like you have on retreat, or living a very quiet life with very good conditions. So the focused approach is quite difficult to integrate into everyday life, because it's so difficult to have a clear single-pointed focus when your mind is full of tensions to do with, ethics, for example. So the focused approach rests upon a very big emphasis on ethics, of being really clear about being honest, being straightforward, generous, etc. If the ethics aren't right, attended to, a focused approach will not work. There's too much static in the mind. So the anchor, on the other hand, is an approach which allows for some movement. So it allows people to practice in everyday life and to find stability. Because you're using the anchor ideally so it becomes the mind becomes still and quiet, and the body calms. But it allows movement because you're not fixating on the breath or the other object. You're just coming back to it. The anchor, you come back to the point. It allows that movement. I hope that's clear. I hope that's sort of clear. The anchor allows movement, and that movement can be instructive and helpful. You can start seeing the movement of the mind, and you start learning about the mind. You start understanding the mind, and then you start understanding how to live in harmony with the way things are. For example, change is a fact. You study subatomic particles going around the large reactor thing. The quarks, the sub-quark particles, is this clear from every level of atomic physics, etc. That there is everything's moving. Even the so-called particles are really just movement. So everything changes, but we don't live our lives with that truth at the front. We live our lives with insurance policies and Gore-Tex, and we protect ourselves from the truth of change as much, and that's not wrong. That's not wrong, but the task is to really understand the truth of change, to know it, and then live in harmony with it. And there will never be an end of stress until we live in harmony with the truth of those kind of basic laws of the universe. Change being one, interconnectedness is another. There's nothing on its own in the universe that's not affecting something else or being affected by something else. So do we live with that truth at the front of our mind, interconnectedness? No. We vote Brexit, or we belong to a certain club, and all the others are wrong. The diesel drivers, they're all wrong. You know what I mean? There's prejudice and separation. So, the task is to know the underlying truth of things, and the anchor is a very helpful approach to that. That's probably what I'll say in short, something like that. Yeah.
And would you say, KB, that in that kind of oscillation and movement, the focus, or the word I would use here is the resting, kind of comes more easily, or it happens through that, or it's a totally different two approaches?
Yeah, we're not really aiming to rest or become still. That may happen, but it is not necessary for it to happen to understand the nature of reality. You need enough stability to see clearly. Now, the other approach, the focused approach, the concentration approach, is a different idea. You create a purified mind that perceives reality directly. The mindfulness approach does it more gradually. I think it's sort of more gradual, bit by bit, and you perceive reality by becoming steady, not by becoming pinpoint focused, jhana, but so you need enough stability. When you're on a train and there's something interesting out the window and it's quite close, you can't see it, it's just a blur. What was that? Was that a duck? What was that? So when it's further away, you can see it clearly, or when the train's going slower, you can see it, and when it stops, you see clearly. So I think what we're doing with mindfulness is slowing the train down so we start to see more clearly what's there. But you don't really need to stop the train, you just need to slow it. Then you can see. And we learn from that seeing. The Seeing That Frees. There's a book called that, The Seeing That Frees, by Robert Bear. He recently died. That's what we're trying to do, just to see. We're trying to work out what on earth is going on. Does anyone here know? Yeah, not get too attached to that question either, but because that would be a mistake as well. But can we flow, or do we have to keep insisting on being these separate little bits? Can we learn to flow, which is, I think, more in tune with what the way things are, is flow and process. That takes courage and work I'm getting a bit serious. Never mind. Yeah. Anything else? Let's have a look. Anchor and breath, anchor and breath. There's a lot of interest in anchors and breath and focus. Oh, God, I thought I recognised you. I thought I recognised you. It's been years, mate. God, lovely to see you. You had long hair when I last saw you. Yeah. Sorry, forgive me. I've just seen a very, very old acquaintance. Yeah. What's clarify the difference between using the breath as an anchor and does that answer the question? I'm not sure it does. I mean, are there any supplementaries?
Okay, so you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
It certainly helps. Yeah, sorry I've repeated the question several times. I wasn't sure how to use this.
Yeah.
So would it be true to say that maybe like with focus, we try and stick with the object, but with an anchor, it's more like frequenting. You accept that you'll wander off when it's more like just coming back as a reference.
Yes. Now you might ask a supplementary Socratic question there. Why is that important to not be so fixed on a single point?
Yeah.
And I think what occurs to me is that you use an object to bring this quietening of the mind, this quietening of the body. One of my teachers, Tejaniya, says that any object will do. So I'm going to say that again. Any object will do. So the angry thought you have, when you're watching the breath, you have an angry thought about something that happened when you're driving. That angry thought is just as valuable as the breath, as the object. And that's the big if it is an object and not a subjective thing, if you're not in it, if you're seeing it clearly from a decentered perspective, that object, the angry emotion that you're experiencing, can be exactly as valuable as the breath. I think having the breath as an anchor rather than a fixed thing you're looking at allows for that kind of elasticity, the learning that comes from seeing objects, allowing objects to come and go. I think when you're really focused on the breath in the jhana practice, there's a similar end result. You start to perceive the flow of the process, if you like, of mind. So it's just another way of doing it. But I would say that for most people practicing in ordinary life, the metaphor of the anchor, which is allowing movement, you're just holding you more or less steady. It allows for the kind of learning which I think is helpful. Learning about how things come and go, and so we're not aiming for this pure, steady mind that sort of somehow purifies. I just find that very difficult in everyday life to experience that. But it's a valid path. They're both valid pathways. But as you say, it's like frequenting the breath as a way of stabilizing mind and body. It's a bit like staying in what we used to call access concentration. It's not ekagata. It's not one pointed. It's more like what that fluid state in where you're steady, things are in harmony, but you can see the flow of things, the flow of thought. Vitaka vichara, using that language, you get that's all present, happening, and you learn from that. And I think the ancient texts support that, the view I've just said. What's required is a certain level of stability, not necessarily this very rarefied states of consciousse, which seem to attract people who want to become superheroes. The ego gets very easily involved with that process, or can do. I hope that answers a little bit. I think maybe we have to experience the difference ourselves. Yeah.
I'm just looking around, and maybe we have time for one more question. So anybody who is kind of sitting there with a question, please come in. And maybe if you're not feeling comfortable with the chat box, that's okay. You can ask out loud. And then, KB, if it's okay, you can guide us into the practice, lead us.
Okay. Maybe I can use the practice as a way of demonstrating what I mean by the anchor.
Brilliant.
Yeah, maybe that'll be helpful. So what is the question that has not been asked? Can you feel it in your throat, that question? Sort of just... I can almost sense in some people there's a question about here, and there's this sense, oh, better not ask that. That I might look silly with that question. That might not be good enough, or... yeah. If it is just there, just let it out, if there is one. Maybe there isn't.
I have one possible question as an option. If you could explain your reservations about loving kindness being to MBSR. And...
Thank you for asking that, yes.
That kind of, sorry, KB, links to another comment that has come in, expansion on changes to MBSR regarding meta. I don't know whether this...
Oh, the same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so I hope you all understand these, what are they called, acronyms: mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. I'll point you first of all to chapter 8 of the MBCT manual, the Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Depression manual. Chapter 8 describes the possible downfall dangers of introducing loving kindness practice within the program. It also explains the benefits, and it's not just someone's idea. It's a research-based chapter. So there are some kind of excellent bits of research around this, but it's always been a bit of a thing. How explicit does the loving kindness need to be? How explicit does it need to be helpful? Now, I did my own study when I was doing research, a little bit of research. I discovered that 1 or perhaps 1.5 people out of 10 found any form of loving kindness practice, however done, creatively expressed, between 1 and 1.5 people found it quite strongly difficult. So I knew that when I was teaching a group of 12, there might well be at least one person who would not say anything, but who would be feeling confused and upset because they couldn't feel anything. However cleverly you did it, however nicely you did it, they just felt they were the odd one out. So this is important, because I don't know how many of you teach, but if you suddenly bring in loving kindness on the all day, for example, where no one can speak, it's the atmosphere of just do it and then go home. You might do a little bit of sharing at the end, but those people are going to go away quite strongly affected, and we don't want that. We don't want people to be feeling even worse about themselves because they can't feel something. So I personally, because of that research, am very careful about the loving kindness practice, and I don't call it that. I just allow the breath-based or the anchor-based practice to be imbued with loving kindness, and to include others in the sense of other in the practice. So a sense of self and other in the practice. Now, interestingly, MBCT and MBSR are 95% the same. That's a quote. They're 95% similar. The research that Willem Kijken did out around England, it's a very important research trial, showed that one of the main mechanisms, one of the main mediators of change in mindfulness courses is self-compassion. So self-compassion was one of the 3 big things that predicted change. But there is no explicit self-compassion practice within that curriculum. So even though there's no explicit aspect to it, it came out through the research as being one of the largest effects of one of the largest aspects that people came away with. So the implicit is extremely powerful. The explicit can be learnt here and really not learnt much deeper. The implicit tends to come in here gradually, like from inside. So I'd say that I like to remember that, the importance of the implicit, and really work it. If I know that I'm not going to do a loving kindness practice in my 8-week course, I really pay attention to the attitudes. I really put a lot of emphasis on the way I speak to people, the way I guide practices, permission giving, allowing, acceptance, patience, trust. Yeah, this is self-compassion. There's nothing else. So explicit self-compassion practice or explicit loving kindness are brilliant after people have learned how to not strive. If they've learned a little bit about acceptance, self-acceptance, they're brilliant. But if someone hasn't really learned about self-acceptance or about non-striving, and then you throw the loving kindness practice at them, well, there's going to be a problem. So I'd say graduate courses, post 8-week course, yes, let's go explicit. Let's explore this properly, fully. Pre 8-week course or during the 8-week course, I'm very cautious, really cautious. I don't want to harm. It's one of my precepts, non-harm. So coming out of non-harm, I'm very cautious. One last thing on this topic. I was at a conference in Chester with John Kabat-Zinn, and someone in the audience asked him that question, Derek. They said, "Where is the compassion in MBSR?" And he was up there on the stage, and he went bright red. He went bright red in the face. You could see the steam starting to come out of his ears. Not really, but it was like that. I could see. He was like, and he said, "What else is it? What else is MBSR but self-compassion? And by extension, compassion," because he talks about the world. In session 7, it's about the world as well as self. So it's all in there. And it's a skillful teacher will bring it through so that people by the end of the 8-week course are actually living self-compassion. They're not talking about it, they're living it. So there's nothing wrong. If you choose to do it, it's fine. But I personally am cautious. I like to know that people are ready for that practice. And then it's fabulous. It's what's missing. We need that explicit practice as soon as we're integrated enough to not get worried about where our emotions are going and what they're like, and we're not self-judgmental too much, then it's an absolute must practice, must do. Wonderful. That's a long answer, but thank you, Sesna Ratner, for asking it. Yeah.
And it brings us quite, very well to the practice, if it's okay for you to lead.
Yes.
Bringing all these things together.
I'm not sure about that, but
from the direct experience to.
But look, guys, before we do anything like with the brain and mind, can you get your body? You may not want to stand up, but you might want to just sort of take a chance to move a little, move around a little. If you need to, have a bit of a stretch and wake up the body. Just for a couple of minutes, waking up the body. And you may not need this, it might be superfluous to your needs, but don't worry. So if you don't need to shake out, that's fine. Don't feel bullied. Here we go. Now I'm getting a big zafu to put my hands on, so that my hands are supported like this. I'm encouraging you to have something to support your hands like this. This takes the weight off your shoulders. So this is a self-compassion practice. Having a pillow in your lap is a self-compassion practice. Let's start with the simple things, like allowing our shoulders to release because our hands are supported. Take whatever breath you need. I'm exaggerating, but take whatever breath you need. And you may want to ignore my guidance at this time. And you can do that by just turning quietly, discreetly turning off the volume, or turning it down. So if you want to be quiet, please feel free to turn the volume down. I won't be offended. I won't even know. And then we begin to do nothing. Let's begin to do nothing. Oh goodness, isn't that good? After all that talking, all that listening, trying to work out what KV's really saying, maybe just letting go. Doing nothing much. Perhaps closing the eyelids gently, perhaps looking down. We might notice that awareness is already here, without any effort from us. We might kind of notice awareness is present. The intention is to simply extend this awareness, to kind of cherish it, allow it to blossom, to come and go, but just to allow it to just gradually arise within us a bit more clearly, not by trying, but just by gently having this intention to welcome awareness. And one simple way we can do this is to feel the connection with the chair or cushion. Awareness is here in this connection. We don't have to make it, it's here. The feeling of pressure, of temperature. Perhaps the feet are on the floor. And through these points of contact, we can be aware of the ground, the stillness beneath us. The steadiness of the ground. So perhaps we could borrow some of this stillness. Invite it up into the lower body, the legs, the seat. Almost like we're joining the lower body to the ground, feeling connection. And then the upper body, the spine and the head balancing on top, rising up from this steadiness. And as we consider that what we're attempting to do here, to encourage awareness into the world, when we consider this is perhaps the most valuable thing that's missing often in the world, there's an automatic sense of dignity arising. This is a gift. This practice is a gift to ourselves and to all around us. And our upper body can reflect this kind of noble, this dignified intention to be of service in our world. So with this intention within the body, feeling the stillness beneath, we might now just gently notice movement. Movement within the body. The small dance of our breathing. Nature happening. And we can gently have the intention to allow this experience, this movement experience, this flow, inviting it to be like a friend. As if we're linking arms and strolling with a friend. Breath by breath. Really feeling into this connection with our friend, the breath. And when we notice we've wandered away from our friend a little and got a bit interested in something else or a bit dreamy, can we really respect this moment, not rushing back to the breath? Really respecting the experience. And then if we want, choosing to return to the flow of breathing. And this might happen many, many times. Feeling the support of the breath, the anchor. Always there, ready, always there to come to. And as we begin to feel just a little bit more steady, we might then just expand our attention out to the whole body around the breath. Not trying to feel everything at once, but just being open to the body. Touch of air on our cheeks, or the physical movement, the echoes of the breath through the belly and shoulders, whatever. Just being open to the body with the breath still happening. Open to notice our body. And where there's any pain or discomfort, really, if it's possible, offering kindness, care, in whatever way seems possible. Meeting our body, breath by breath. When we notice we're carried away with something else, can we really take a moment to notice this? And then a choice. And as we get a little bit more kind of steady with the body and breath, not perfect, not at all perfect, but just enough steadiness, we might then open our intention to notice all experience happening. Any and all experience happening. Perhaps we notice sound or passing emotion, thoughts, sort of settling back. Perhaps with the breath as a background anchor. Open to notice, open to know. Our life happening. And feeling free to stay with the breath and clarity of the breath or some other anchor as long as we like. There's no rush. Opening when we feel ready. So allowing into this openness the idea of a transition. Really sort of sensing, knowing this, an idea in the mind. It might have a feeling tone, wanted, not wanted. There might simply be confusion. But inviting this idea of transition and responding with a deeper breath, sort of embodying the transition with a deeper breath. So we feel the whole body moving into transition. And on the out-breath, perhaps a sense of letting things be, however this has been. Letting it all be just how it is, if that's possible. We might like to repeat that deeper breath. Embodying the transition. Feeling the transition. Sensing the floor, the chair, the cushion. And when we're ready, bringing in a little movement, the eyelids perhaps. The eyelids lifting when we're ready. Sight happening. And all these amazing worlds behind the little postcard shapes in front of us. Oh, this amazing, amazing world. Rich, rich. Yeah. May you all be as well as you can be well at this time. And may you all find peace. May we all find peace. Yeah.
Thank you, KB, for such a inspiring, wonderful presence, conversations, insights, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for participating, for being with us.
Go change the world, you guys. Go change the world. Do what you can. Change the world. Yeah.
Thank you so much, KV. It's been really rich and wonderful. And I love the humour.